This is episode number 182 of the Mixology Talk podcast, and it's a new month, which means a brand new topic. You may have heard, but this month is going to be all about smoke, and we're hoping to have 3 podcasts this month. Fingers crossed we can get them all lined up, but that's what we're aiming for. So the very first one is this one, obviously. We're going to be talking to a really fantastic bartender who's worked extensively and experimented extensively on cocktails, smoking cocktails. So he's going to talk about the basics and then do some pretty cool deep dives into different flavor combinations and stuff. Second one's going to be a barbecue pitmaster. We're going to be focusing and geeking out on different types of wood and what each one brings to the cocktail. And finally, a spirit specialist, for lack of a better word, and talk about different types of spirits that feature smoke as one of their kind of tasting elements. So I hope you enjoy it, and I think you're really going to enjoy this one. We're going to be talking about the basics and deep dive into smoked cocktails. So welcome back to the Mixology Talk podcast. We are focusing on Smoke Month today, and I thought it'd be really great to have Ben Potts join us from Beaker Gray. What's up, man? How you doing?
Oh, man. Great as I can be. How are you?
Yeah, we're kind of catching up before the podcast started about all the intricacies of this new COVID environment, and it felt cleansing, I'll be honest. It felt cathartic. So, but like I said, man, thank you for joining me, and I am looking forward to kind of learning more about techniques on smoking and smoked cocktails in general. Mm-hmm. So what made you kind of interested in this initial idea about smoked cocktails? Because you started this quite a while ago, right?
Sure, yeah. I've probably been playing with smoked cocktails for about 6 or 7 years. Uh-huh. Definitely wouldn't say I was a pioneer, but definitely toward the early adopter side of things. Realistically, you know, when someone gives you an opportunity to play with fire at work, you kind of take it. And, you know, so that's the fun side of things, right? And then knowing that fire and smoke and things of that nature are so appealing to me, I can only imagine how the guest feels about seeing someone else do it. So I would say that was the initial appeal, but once I started messing around with smoke and different ingredients that you can light on fire and smoke them and incorporate them in different ways, it kind of like broadened the horizons of like sort of cocktail creation for me, and I thought it would be, you know, a pretty cool thing to explore. So I did.
Excellent. And I actually came across you through I think it was a Whiskey Advocate article around smoke, and it was amazing the level of detail you were going into, and we'll definitely kind of get there. But before we get too geeky and too advanced, would you mind kind of backtracking and talking a little bit about kind of the basics? Like, is there a set of cocktails or cocktail families that really lend themselves to smoking?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think my rule of thumb is kind of like if the spirit of the cocktail has had some experience with char or toast or smoke in its creation, then good chance it's going to play well with it later in life, right? So you're thinking whiskeys, aged brandies, rums, even aged tequilas can work pretty well. I probably wouldn't go with like a Blanco tequila. And same, I probably wouldn't go for a white rum, but you know, gin and vodka I'd probably skip. But really anything that kind of already has that incorporation of wood, smoke, spice, any cocktail that falls from those families. And again, you're kind of wanting to stay more toward the stirred side of things. So old fashions, Manhattans, or any variants on those. That's a great starting point. And then whenever you're feeling more adventurous, you can kind of branch out from there.
Got it. Okay. Because I imagine the citrus in smoke might be a little strange unless you do it really well, right?
Yeah. I mean, it depends what kind of citrus. I mean, if you're really going for a fresh, bright cocktail, smoke might fight with it a little bit. Right. But maybe if you're doing something like that does have citrus, maybe like bergamot, something that has like maybe like an aged character to it, you know, you might be able to get away with it. So fortunately, when you're making cocktails, there's a lot of trial and error involved, and worst case scenario, you drink something that might not taste great.
That's right. Absolutely. You got to drink your mistakes. So when we talk about kind of smoking cocktails, there's a lot of different kind of techniques and kind of equipment that is focused specifically on this. So what kind of equipment and techniques would you kind of recommend for somebody just getting into smoking cocktails?
So I think everyone should kind of start with a smoking gun. I think the company that really started this is Polyscience. They came out with, you've seen it everywhere. It's basically, it looks like a gun. It's got an on switch. There's like a little mesh filter on the top. There's an air pump and there's a hose. And basically it sucks air through the mesh where you have your either wood chips or spice or whatever you're smoking. You apply heat to it. You can use a lighter. For this specific tool, you shouldn't use a blowtorch because it'll actually melt the plastic.
Okay.
Use a lighter, but then you might get some butane flavor. So I'm always more of a fan of something like maybe like a hemp wick or something like that, something that's going to really hold the flame and then let the medium burn. And then, with the hose, you can either stick it inside a glass, you can stick it into a larger vessel, you can stick it in a box. It's kind of up to you at that point. But that's where I would start. And then moving on from there, again, like you can start experimenting with different vessels, right? So like a larger container might have a lighter impact with smoke, whereas a smaller container with like a more concentrated thing that you're actually smoking would have more impact on the flavor. You can also take a blowtorch and light up some wood chips on a board, or just light up the board itself, and that smoke that emanates from it you can use to smoke a glass or something like that.
Got it. And I imagine this has a really dramatic effect as far as like the visual of a cocktail. Because smoke by itself, people pay attention to, either for good or bad, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, exactly. They're like, oh, okay, something's smoking. You're like just sniffing around. It's like, oh, but that's actually a nice smoke smell.
Right, exactly. It's not burning, wires or plastic.
Right. Yeah, not a great smoke smell. But yeah, and they're actually still kind of innovating in this arena. Like obviously, the Polyscience gun came out, industry standard. There's a couple other ones, like there's the Super Aladdin, which is like much like it's like a slightly higher end, I would say, product. It's a little more robust. The components are metal versus plastic. I think the motor's a little bit stronger. I've actually completely dissected one before, so they're pretty well made. And then there's like the new Flavor Blaster, I believe it's called, that makes like a bubble filled with some sort of, air. And in this case, what we're talking about could be smoke. Right. So I haven't used a Flavor Blaster, so I don't know the best applications for it, but it does look really cool because you do have like a smoke bubble.
There was a period of time where that was the only thing coming across my Facebook feed. Like everybody and their mother had one. They were like putting smoke on everything. I was like, I don't know about that one, but it's cool.
It looks super cool. It looks really awesome. And I was actually, I was going to get to play with one right before this whole thing went down back in March, but never got around to it. But I'm sure I'll get a chance at some point in the future.
Perfect. Okay, so I think we covered the basics. And like I said to anybody that's listening, we're going to geek out pretty hard on this one. The article that I found, this I think is probably a tip of the iceberg if I had to imagine.
Yeah, you can get pretty deep with it depending on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go.
Cool. So now that we have kind of the basics down, we've talked about the spirits or the cocktails that kind of lend themselves for starting. We've talked about some of the equipment, the Super Aladdin, the Polyscience, and I know Charles Joly launched kind of that presentation piece. It's like a glass, essentially bird cage where you put the cocktail in and smokes it all up. So we talked about like the equipment that you could use. So I want to talk about what you burn. Like you've covered a lot of this, and I'm really curious to see kind of what are some things out of the ordinary, because when we think of smoke, we typically think of wood, which we're going to have a podcast for that in the future here. But you kind of went a different direction, and I'd love to kind of hear about some of the other things that you've experimented with.
Yeah, so I think when I started smoking things, I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna smoke wood, right? So wood chips of various types. They actually sell wood chips specifically used for smokers of this size, and they tend to be like oak and cedar and like other sort of fragrant woods. But I have actually enjoyed quite a bit smoking spices, which is really cool. Some dried fruits, like coconut. Like if you take there's certain types of coconut that have like a nice, like it's dried coconut, but you kind of have to be careful about it because you want something a little more substantial, because you want to more of toast it rather than char it, because you can get like some of the things that you can smoke get this really acrid odor. And it's not great. Like you can smoke rosemary a little bit, you can smoke thyme a little bit, but you can't smoke mint. I mean, you can, it just doesn't smell great, or at least not to me. And then, anything that's already dried it's like a lot of fun to play with. Like you can smoke apple chips, you can smoke banana. But again, you have to be careful. I haven't experimented with everything, so it is a little bit interesting to play around with. And you can, that's what I really love, is the fact that you can just kind of like, all right, well, I want to play with this thing. What do I do? Oh, I light it on fire and see what it smells like. So it is a lot of fun.
So one of the things that kind of comes to my mind when I think about really like interesting smoke is pipe tobacco. Have you tried that with cocktail smoke?
Yeah, absolutely. It does, like you said, have an incredible smell. I mean, tobacco, for all the stigmas it has, is actually like very fragrant and can be very pleasant in a lot of ways. So I've definitely tried. I try not to smoke the ingredients when I use something like tobacco, because that can turn some people off. But maybe if I want to smoke something like the glass itself, or maybe the mixing vessel that I'm using to impart like a very light, like a light scent on top, that way people aren't so apprehensive about the idea of tobacco being affiliated with what they're consuming. But it is really nice. I mean, even nowadays, Florida's legalizing, marijuana. I mean, you could go so far as to use that as like a smoking ingredient, or hemp even, to flavor a cocktail or the vessel that you're using.
Sure, absolutely. That's a crazy thought. That's really interesting. And I'm not sure if everyone would be super excited to have a bunch of weed behind the bar with a bunch of bartenders.
It's like, man, inventory control. Guys, it's only for the smoking gun.
Right? I'll be right back. I'm going to the walk-in.
Right, not that pipe, the other pipe.
Oh, it's funny. Oh, man. So back on track here. So when you're kind of considering, a smoked cocktail, you have a bunch of variables now at your control. You have spices, you have different spirits, and how do you kind of get those things fused together in a really cohesive way?
Right. So you very much have to consider what you're working with and how delicate or robust a flavor you're going for. I find that I'm not big on using smoke to change the base spirit, because normally when I'm writing a cocktail menu, and this is for more commercial bartending rather than at-home bartending, like if you're at home, do whatever you want, right? When I'm trying to showcase like a certain spirit, right? Like I have this like beautiful whiskey, like I think it's incredible by itself, but I really want to find a way to highlight it. I don't generally mess with the spirit. I will work with the other components of the cocktail, whether it be glass ice, modifiers, syrups, whatever. And then once I figure out what I'm going to be working with, like let's say I want to make like a smoked cinnamon, like apple cinnamon syrup, right? Mm-hmm. I will figure out how I want to best get that cinnamon smoke in there. Do I want to take the syrup and bring the smoke in? Do I want to put the syrup in a smoker? Do I want to take, do I just want to have like a small amount of smoke interact with it? Do I want to add something else like wood to it? Do I want to flavor the wood like with some sort of essential oil? Like sometimes like bergamot keeps coming back to mind because it's such a great fragrant smell that actually does work really well when you're smoking, medium for cocktails.
Sure.
So, and then again, like it does come back to like how much smoke do I want and what is the scent of the smoke that I want. Sure. And then you can actually double up layers, right? So you can say like, I want to do the cinnamon smoked syrup, and then I want to do a touch of cedar on top, or oak on top. And then you're going to have these different layers of smoke. You don't want it to be like someone's blowing smoke in your face, which is very unpleasant. Mm-hmm. You just want it to be like, okay, I walked into a room and there's this like beautiful fragrance of like smoked meat in the background, right? But where does that flavor come from? It does come out to a lot of trial and error and almost thinking to yourself, okay, like what part of a cocktail do I want to highlight? Do I want to highlight the nose? Do I want to highlight some like the nose and the body? It does work out to being a little bit of a mad science experiment, but it's again, it is always a lot of fun to be playing around with smoke and cocktails.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a pretty big thing, and that is technique. Because I think when people, especially with the Instagram feeds and Facebook feeds, and people see cocktails, smoke cocktails, and you see the physical smoke, like that's the first thing you think. But I think you bring up a really good point. Is there's a lot of different techniques in order to introduce smoked flavor. It doesn't necessarily have to go through the smoking gun. Right. And I think that, you brought up a really great point of like experiment with it, infuse it in different areas, like, and you can have it sounds like you can have a lot more control over the final cocktail, instead of almost having this uncertain variable of how much smoke is going to get infused with a presentation piece like that.
Yeah. I mean, putting it in like one of the boxes, like you mentioned that Charles Joly was like developed like for the Craft House line. Mm-hmm. That's a really cool thing to use, but you do have to be careful with the amount of smoke that you're incorporating into the cocktail, because if it overpowers the cocktail, it's not going to work out, and it can't be temperamental. It can't be one of those cocktails like, okay, just a little too much smoke and it's out the window. Right. Especially if you're making it in a bar where you have 6 different bartenders who all have different ideas of how much smoke goes in, how thick is the smoke, how long is the smoke sitting in there, how quickly does the smoke dissipate once I open the door. There's a lot of different variables that you have to consider there. And, I do love the box technique because it is very visually pleasing. Mm-hmm. But, for glassware, I do love smoking a glass. Like, you always got to make sure the glass is cold because you want the smoke to stick to something. And I wish I was a little bit more, I could explain it a little bit more scientifically, but it tends to work better with cold, chilled glassware. And I'm sure if I thought about it for 30 seconds, I could probably be like, oh yeah, it's because the molecules on the glass are moving very slowly and the smoke is attracted to those, and that's why it stays there. But, at this point, I'm just kind of making that explanation. Sure. But it does work. I mean, we don't know how airplanes fly, so, who knows why smoke sticks to cold glasses. Right, and I think that's the thing is like, that's the tip. That's from working with experience of, all right, I tried it with a dry glass, room temperature, and I tried it with a cold glass, and the results are in. It's cold. Yep. So we don't need to know the black magic behind it, as long as it works. Exactly. But I do like, so I always use a cold glass, and I really do like the presentation of, like, I either have a board or a metal tray or a glass or something, and I take the torch and I torch up some cloves or something like that, and then I put the glass on top, and they're looking at this glass like, what's he going to do with that glass that has these smoke cloves that's filling up with smoke? And then, a few seconds later, I'm, pouring like the cocktail into the smoked glass, and it's beautiful, and the smoke is billowing out of it. So, the techniques that you can use to really make the smoke presentation something that your guests are going to be really into is, it's a lot of fun to play around with. Sure, absolutely. Now, I kind of want to ask you a couple of
kind of direct questions. What's the best smoke cocktail you've ever created? Can you walk us through the ingredients, production techniques, and all that around it? And I'm going to ask the opposite question. What was the worst cocktail you've ever designed? And kind of why did it not work, in your opinion?
Yeah. Okay. So the best cocktail that I've made with smoke, or my favorite, was a cocktail that used to be on the Beaker Gray menu. It was called the Black Orchid. And the reason it was called the Black Orchid is two parts. One, Bee Orchid, if you ever played Killer Instinct as a kid growing up, she was the well-endowed fighter that flashed you at the end when you lost. So major impact on me. So her name is Bee Orchid, and it stood for Black Orchid. And also I used vanilla bean. I smoked vanilla bean in Cronin Swedish Punch. So Cronin Swedish Punch, yeah. So that's already kind of like this cool spiced, it's almost like a spiced rum liqueur with like a blend of rums and spices and whatnot. But then I would take vanilla bean, like not cheap vanilla bean, but actually used vanilla bean. So we would made a lot of vanilla syrups in house. Pastry would use vanilla bean a lot. So once it's like gutted and used and basically not usable to make any more syrups, we'd torch it up. We'd get the smoking gun. We'd pipe it into a big like gallon mixing glass, like a huge one. We'd pour in a whole bottle of Swedish Punch, and then we just kind of like agitate it until the Swedish Punch had this really nice, sweet vanilla aroma, like a vanilla smoke aroma. And then that was mixed with Venezuelan rum, Amaro, orange bitters, and I think there was another ingredient that I'm not remembering. Probably, knowing me, some sort of fortified wine or aromatized fortified wine. It was a pretty good seller, like a nice stirred rum cocktail. Nice light hint of vanilla smoke, which was really great on the nose. And it was a pretty big hit, you know. And vanilla, it also comes from an orchid, so
tying it all back.
There you go. Yeah, I love naming cocktails. It's probably my favorite part of the whole process. Is like, okay, so now we get to name it, right? Or I start with a name, and then like I'm working on one now called Sherry Coke, and it's gonna be like PX Sherry and like rum and cherry herring and soda water. And I've tried it before. It tastes exactly like a cherry Coke.
Oh, what?
But Sherry Coke.
You know, it's funny because mine is the exact opposite. I love creating cocktails, but man, when it comes to naming, I'm just like, just call it cocktail no name. That's all I care.
Right. Cocktail number 85.
Right, exactly. That sounds delicious, by the way. Like the idea of using old kind of just spent vanilla husks.
Yeah.
Smoke, that just sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it ended up working out. Well, there was a lot of trial and error for this one, of course.
Sure.
So I wanted to smoke the whole cocktail with vanilla, and then we tasted it, and I was like, man, it's too much vanilla. It's too much vanilla smoke. And then we tried doing just the glass, like, man, it's not enough. I was like, man, let's try smoking one of the ingredients. And, you know, Cronin has like a pretty good amount of alcohol in it. I suppose we could have done the Amaro, but it kind of sounded cooler. I would imagine that smoking the Amaro and the Cronin probably wouldn't have made too big of an impact in the cocktail itself. But it ended up working out great. So we tried it with the Cronin. We're like, this is dope. So
just done. Yeah. Okay. Now for the other question. Worst cocktail you ever created and kind of what went wrong?
So I think I got this idea in my head that I wanted to do like like everyone's had the idea of they wanted to do a peanut butter and jelly cocktail, right? They're like, I'm going to do a peanut butter and jelly cocktail. I'll do like, like a grape cordial, and then I'm going to do like peanut infused whiskey, and then I'll make, peanut butter and jelly. And I was like, let me take it one step further. Let me do a smoked peanut butter and jelly. And let's just say the smell and taste of charred peanuts, not my favorite. I don't think we ever ended up doing it with, I think we just did the peanuts themselves. We didn't do like the inside nut. We didn't actually do the peanut husks. To be honest, the peanut husk probably would have made a better smoke, but I was so so scarred by that I just didn't even want to go forward with it.
You're like, scrap that one, moving on.
Yeah, it's like, man, it just really doesn't taste good with the jet. You know what? It doesn't taste good at all. We're gonna start over. Just do a more traditional peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something.
Oh, that's too funny, man. I could see. Yeah, it's funny because when you draft a lot of these cocktails, they sound great on paper. You're like, man, this is gonna kill it. Can't wait. And you start putting the ingredients together. You're like, this is garbage.
And smoked nuts doesn't really sound that bad because,
Right.
like you do the chestnuts. Those are nice.
Yep.
You roast those, and you can roast peanuts, but smoking them, not the same thing.
Right. Oh, that's too funny, man. Oh, gosh. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I think this is like everybody that's ever created a cocktail. Like, I got this vision. It's going to kill it. And then, yeah.
Yeah, it tastes like garbage.
Oh, man. Cool. So I think, is one of the other things I want to talk about, last kind of content question here.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about technique, but we also have a bunch of ingredients now at our disposal, like in our pantries that we get, like especially if you work in a restaurant, that are kind of pre-smoked. Is there any ingredients that you've come across that are basically from the pantry that are pre-smoked that you've incorporated in cocktails or in the past?
Yeah, well, what ends up happening is that I always find myself when I really want like a cool smoky flavor in something, I'll end up doing some sort of like fat wash, right? So you have like smoked meats, those are awesome. Smoked and cured meats. And, like the OG of fat washed cocktails is bacon, and smoked bacon is delicious. But, we've made, like at Beaker, the chef there is super talented, and he's like smoking and braising and like just taking all these different kinds of meats and putting them through, all types of cooking methods. And, there's a lot of times where like, he'll be like, oh yeah, I've got this really dope smoked lamb dish. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Can I have like the leftovers? And I'm going to make like a fat wash spirit. And I do it, and it's fantastic. And like, that's probably my favorite go-to of pre-smoked things.
Sure.
Is just meats, because you can work with them. The fattiness in them holds on to the smoke really well. That translates to the spirit really well, depending on what you're doing. Like if you're doing like maybe like a split-based thing where you're doing, like maybe a rum, and then you do like a fat washed bourbon or something. And then a smoked fat wash bourbon, like you could really play with the flavors a lot, get some pineapple in there one way or another. It could be pretty cool.
Oh, that sounds great, man. And last kind of thing, what's your number one tip for people kind of getting into smoked cocktails for the first time?
Probably don't start doing it when you're drunk. Practice sober.
That sounds like the voice of experience right there.
Yeah, man. Dude, bartending can be pretty dangerous. There's a lot of sharp things and fire, and like they can get pretty tricky. So, being responsible, that's probably my number one tip.
That was great. That was amazing. Well, Ben, you've been super generous with your time. I can't thank you enough. But before we go, is there anything you're kind of working on that you'd love to promote?
Yeah, absolutely. This recent turn of events over the last few months has really given me a lot of opportunity to spend time working on myself. And in the past, I've done some consulting, but recently I partnered with a longtime friend, industry veteran, Guy Yarashi, and we're starting a consulting company called Unfiltered Consulting. We're going to be working with bars and restaurants around the country. We already have a few clients, which is incredible, meaning that people are really just sort of ramping up to get, their operation at a level that they want to bring back to the world and be like, while we were closed, look at all this great stuff we worked on. So we've been working with a lot of hospitality clients. We'll be doing, experiential brand marketing for beverage producers. And that's probably the biggest thing that I've been working on with Guy. But I've also been doing something a little bit more playful. I started a YouTube channel / Instagram page / Facebook page / website called Drinking by Yourself, right? And it's very much how the name sounds. I found myself, especially during actual quarantine, drinking by myself. Surprisingly enough, I live alone. I live with 22 plants. And while they're great drinking buddies, they don't talk much. So I ended up making a lot of cocktails, by myself. And I was like, I've been doing this for 12 or 13 years. Maybe I'll put it on the internet. And I remember the first time I recorded it, I was like, man, my voice, I guess the microphone on my camera just didn't sound great. And I just started messing around with some video editing software. I was like, I can narrate over it and add some music. Oh, this is a hilarious soundtrack to put in the background of this video. Let me narrate it over it and just have this caricature of myself just talking about it. And it's kind of anonymous, but everyone kind of knows it's me. But it's been fun. It's been a nice little distraction. I'm not doing them as frequently as I want to, but I'm still doing them from time to time. I actually have one coming up in a week or two that should be pretty funny.
Yeah, and we actually talked about this before the podcast here. I've actually seen a handful of them. I think you got 10 or something like that up. I've probably watched most of them, and they're so funny. And little pro tip: listen to it at about 1.5 speed, because the cadence is just it's fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. But I like I said, I can't thank you enough for your time. Definitely go check out the links. We'll have them in the show notes over at mixologytalk.com / I think it's 182. But I'll definitely include those as well. But thank you for sharing all your experience with Smoke Cocktails, man.
Hey, man, my pleasure.
So once again, thanks to Ben Potts for joining us. Like I mentioned, I ran across him when I did some research in the matter, and after reading the article and watching his YouTube videos, I knew he would be an amazing guest, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. So I kind of gave a little prelude to what we're going to be doing over the next couple weeks in Smoke Month, so I hope you join us for the following podcast. Cheers, everyone, and hope you're staying safe.